David. David.
Dave, are you in the fridge again? Get out of the fridge.
David. What is up, everyone? I'm David Wells. This is the David Wells Experiment, so let's get cracking. So, The Batman has been out for a while now. It's been on HBO Max and DVD and digital and all that for a red hot minute. So, I remember when this was just going to be some Ben Affleck spinoff. And then as time went on, Ben Affleck didn't want to play Batman because he thought, okay, I'm going to turn to some vices, which would not be good for me. And Matt Reeves, the director of all those Planet of the Apes movies and Cloverfield, he was approached to do it, and he really didn't want to have anything to do with it because it wasn't his vision of what Warner Brothers was presenting to him, wasn't his vision of what he wanted to do. And he said, like, okay, this could be an interesting movie, the script you sent me, but it's not what I want to do. And then they're like, okay, well, what do you want to do? And that's when they got the ball rolling on that movie. Now, this movie was made during a very interesting time. They had made about a quarter of the movie when they had to shut down. And yeah, so anyway, the Batman finally released, and I think, lockdowns and shutting down increased the budget significantly. And there was some trepidation about, well, are we going to get to see this in theaters again, or is it going to get pushed back? But the movie's released, and now it's on home video or streaming or whatever. Now, early on, this movie got a lot of comparisons to David Fincher, particularly his movies Seven and Zodiac. I think the goal for this movie was to try to do... The movie is different from the Christopher Nolan movies. I think one of the things they were aiming for that was similar was to be grounded and realistic, which is basically kind of what all hero movies have to be these days. But they had to but they had to be different. They couldn't just ape Christopher Nolan. And I do wonder, at what point are superhero movies not going to be grounded and realistic? You have to wonder if we've done that so much that we're going to just start to not care. I think as long as we have good storytelling and people are engaged, that's got to be the primary focus, but that just feels like a given. So there's a lot of comparisons between David Fincher and his movies and the Batman. So I liked the movie. I remember it was the first time I saw it. It was one of the few times where I didn't want to look at my phone. Is it perfect? No, but it's enjoyable. If I had made this movie, I would have been thrilled to be able to say I made that, but I didn't. All credit goes to Matt Reeves. So one of the things I have to say right off the bat is Robert Pattinson, he's a great Batman. I do think one thing that he gets better than Christian Bale, which, some people might say that's heresy, but the thing I have to give him props for is his voice. He has a Batman voice, but he doesn't do it to the point where it's a parody of itself. Now, I can watch the Christian Bale Batman movies, and I'm not distracted by the voice. It's like, okay, he's got the voice, but it doesn't hinder my enjoyment of it. So, kudos to Robert Pattinson for getting the voice right. I know that was a tough nut to crack. And definitely, that was something also that Ben Affleck got right, because he didn't do a voice. In his movie, he had like a voice modulator, which I think they might have thought about doing in the Chris Nolan ones, but ultimately they went analog and had Christian Bale just change his voice by himself. So one of the things I think it does great is the Christopher Nolan movies were made at a time when the internet hadn't become the thing that it was. When they made Dark Knight, it was starting to become that. And when it released Dark Knight Rises, it was basically just about done, and it became the incarnation that we know it to be today. Because if you've seen like Dark Knight, they don't really have smartphones. I think they use Blackberries and other sorts of phones. But that, to the movie's credit, that never makes it feel dated. Like, I'll watch the trailer for Dark Knight and I'm getting hyped up for it like it's a new movie, but then it says coming summer 2008. I'm like, oh yeah, it was that long ago. And it doesn't feel that way. So I think one of the things that the Batman does is it tries to do for Riddler what Dark Knight did for Joker, in that it takes core aspects of the character and makes it believable. And it's like, well, how do you do that? Because if you know the Riddler, he makes puzzles and gives people clues to try to figure out, and they're usually pretty ridiculous. So it's like, how do you base that and make it grounded and realistic? So they look to the Zodiac Killer and David Fincher's movie of the same name, Zodiac, as an inspiration of like, yeah, somebody was doing this. Now, Jim Carrey, who previously played the Riddler in the Joel Schumacher versions of Batman, he took issue because the movie is so realistic and grim in tone that he is worried about people copying the Riddler. I mean, that's a fair point. But at the same time, you've got to wonder how many of like the recent tragedies perpetuated by madmen, how many of them wouldn't have done what they did if they didn't see the news talk about them all the time. So who knows? I know that Joaquin Phoenix, when he was asked about his character Joker inspiring acts of violence, he said, the research I've done shows that stuff like what we're doing now is like not the best way to approach things. I'll have a conversation with you off screen, but yeah, it's best not to talk about it. So that was an interesting take. And the reason that, news outlets and stuff, why they promote that kind of thing, when a tragedy happens, it'll blow up, and they're doing it to make money. So, I don't know. Gotta wonder who the real villain is here. But anyway, I've got to get out of that habit of saying anyway. I should just pause and think about what I say. So they took inspiration from the Zodiac Killer. They also took inspiration from the movie Seven. I think what they did with each one was they took the concept from Seven of an ideologically driven antagonist, and then they took the methodology of the Zodiac Killer from the movie and they blended it together. And so that's how we got the Riddler here. So I don't think it's fair to make a comparison between David Fincher's movies and the Batman in a way, because there's a danger of thinking like, oh man, they're trying to make it like David Fincher movie. This is going to be great. And it is a great movie. But there runs the risk of, oh, if you go and see it and it's not exactly like a David Fincher movie, you'll be disappointed. So stylistically, I can see where they drew inspiration from. But the thing is, like, so It's shot in a way that's real, but it's also stylized. I think Kevin Smith said it best. He was quoting somebody who said, the Chris Nolan movies brought Batman into the real world. The Matt Reeves, the Batman movie, it's brought the comic book world into the real world. And I think that sums up the Batman perfectly. Now, I did enjoy the movie and it had my attention like the first showing. The second one, maybe because I saw it before, I felt like I could take a break and go to the restroom, and I was distracted by other things at that time. So I didn't feel the compulsion to do that. I did see Dark Knight like 6 times in theater when it was out. I didn't feel the same need to, but at the same time, what with the theatrical window for movies now being shorter, pretty much because of like the pandemic, it's now become like a 45-day window. And it was kind of leaning that way even pre-pandemic. So we can't really blame it on that. If anything, it accelerated that. So there simply wasn't the opportunity to see it that many times. Now, one of the things about... So if one issue people have with the Batman is that it has a long runtime. The movie is about 3 hours long. It didn't feel like a 3-hour movie when I first saw it, and even the second time around, I was like, okay. But part of me can't help but wonder if... Part of me can't help but wonder if maybe they could have done 2 more drafts of the script to maybe cut 40 minutes worth of material out. I can't help but feel like they could have streamlined it and it would have like been just as good. It's interesting that that didn't happen. And what's even more interesting is that the movie was 3 hours long and it did as well as it did. I don't know that it reached $1 billion at the box office. I think it did something like 780 million. I'm not totally sure. But yeah, it did great. Warner Brothers was very happy and they greenlit a sequel right away. Now, my issue with the movie was, so spoiler alert, at the very end of the movie, the Riddler is in a cell and he's next to this one unnamed character who makes an allusion to clowns. And everybody know, oh, it's the Joker. At first you don't see him. Then you see a glimpse of him through like an open part of the door or something. And I was a little bit put off by the movie. It felt I felt slightly deflated in my experience with it. And then they released a deleted scene not too long after that that basically showed way more of the Joker. And I'm like, okay, I get it. I'm enjoying this. And I know why they deleted the scene, because it was supposed to be about halfway through the movie. And I think they, I think the audiences would have been like, oh my gosh, it's the Joker. And maybe their attention would have been taken off of Paul Dano's Riddler, that's who they were really trying to make shine. One thing the movie did that I didn't expect was, so I thought what was going to happen was, in the movie, there's this reporter who reports on Martha Wayne having been in an asylum, and Thomas Wayne turns to a crime boss to try to get the guy silenced, and it's left ambiguous whether he was murdered or not. So for a second, I thought they were going to make the Riddler that guy's son, but they didn't. They made him this sort of disenfranchised character who grew up in an orphanage, and because of bad public spending, the orphanage was kind of left to be a rotting open wound, and he got disillusioned with how Gotham functioned. So one thing it does differently than the Chris Nolan movies is that they do give the Riddler a backstory, unlike Joker, whereas Joker is just sort of left to be a force of nature. So, which is why they never gave him an origin or anything. Now, I do think that one part of the movie that feels interesting is the ending. It's been commented that Act 1 and Act 2, they feel like they're in a movie, but Act 3, where Riddler reveals, like, oh, he planted explosives near the dams that keep Gotham City from being flooded, that feels like its own movie, like it becomes a different movie. And I gotta say, that's pretty accurate. Now, there were scenes in the Dark Knight trilogy, where that happened, but they all felt like the same movie. It didn't feel like there was sort of a shift in, like, okay, this is one kind of movie, now it's another. That was the case with the Batman. Now, I do have my own issues with... I don't want to make a comparison between Chris Nolan and the Matt Reeves Batman movie, but as I've said before, there are two types of scenes that Chris Nolan does better than Matt Reeves. So Chris Nolan had scenes in his Batman movies where cronies were carrying out the orders of their leader, their superior. I feel like Chris Nolan does that better. Also, the interrogation scene in the Batman between Batman and the Riddler, it's supposed to be... It's a scene not too dissimilar from Batman interviewing the Joker. Again, I think it really is two characters, good and evil, on soapboxes exchanging ideas. It's one of those scenes like in Job where Satan goes to heaven and him and God have a dialogue. Christopher Nolan is much better at those kinds of scenes than I say Matt Reeves is. Now, that's not to discredit Matt Reeves, but okay. So anyway, I just said the word. I think the movie is similar to David Fincher movies in that you have these characters who are basically obsessed. In Zodiac, you have this cartoonist who works at a newspaper, and he loves to solve puzzles. So in a way, it's kind of like the Riddler, except in reverse. He's almost like a mirror image of the Zodiac killer. Zodiac makes puzzles, he solves them. And he becomes obsessed to a point where this becomes his life, to where he ignores everything else. He used to be married, and then he gets married again in the course of the movie, but the Zodiac becomes such a focal point for him that eventually that even falls apart, and he almost winds up losing his life in the movie, but that's how driven he is. You sort of get a feeling that that's the case with Robert Pattinson's Batman, that he is just this driven. And there's even a scene where it almost costs him his relationship with Alfred, where Alfred, he opens up a letter bomb and he winds up in the hospital. But of course, they're not going to kill Alfred in the first movie. That would have been way too gutsy. And I guess you could make a comparison to Brad Pitt's character in Seven, where he's just he's young and he's driven, and he's probably more driven by emotion than he is by logic and morals. But then again, there's an aspect of Robert Pattinson's Batman that is similar to Morgan Freeman's character, who is methodical and procedural, and he knows about the mechanics of what it takes to look into a case and see all the moving parts and what direction to go into. So I think one difference, though, is in a Fincher movie, there's never a Batman character. There's never a knight in shining armor. It is kind of just regular people. They're on their own against, a sort of menacing nature. It would have been great if we could have gotten more of that feeling from Robert Pattinson's Batman, that he was just sort of this alone human character who was against something that seemed, just so stacked against him. They touched on that somewhat, but again, I think this is a really good movie. I think maybe 2 drafts of a script could have made it a really great movie, a masterpiece. And again, Kevin Smith and Mark Bernardin on their podcast, Fat Man Beyond. Mark Bernardin was critical of the movie, but Kevin Smith brought up the point that while Batman Begins was enjoyable, it wasn't the masterpiece that Dark Knight was. And he theorizes that the sequel to The Batman is going to be the masterpiece. It's going to be their Dark Knight. And I don't have any reason to doubt that. I'm really looking forward to what they do next. Do hope it's a little bit shorter. It was a great first-time experience, but I did sort of have to make an effort to see it again the second time. But again, great movie. Matt Reeves is a great director. I've seen him do wonders before. But, it's just one of those things where if you're going to bring up an issue, it's like, well, there was this. So this has been the David Wells Experiment. Have an absolutely super day, and we'll see you again next time. Bye.